Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, our first of many What's New customer webinars. We hope you will learn about some new product capabilities that you can leverage to maximize your investment in AlertSite. Our presenters today are Ken Godskind, VP of Monitoring Products, and Brian Hutchinson, RSC Manager. Many of you probably know Ken and Brian. We're scheduled for about an hour, including Q&A at the end. Please type your questions into the chat interface of GoToWebinar, and we'll do our best to answer all questions during the live event. If we can't get to your question, we'll follow up with you individually after the webinar. At this time, I'll turn things over to Ken.
Thank you, Andrea. Brian and I are excited about sharing what's new in the AlertSite console with the customers today, and looking forward to helping make them familiar with those capabilities and able to use them in the accounts. There we go. The agenda for today is to cover AlertSite's new cross-browser performance monitoring. Given today's browser fragmentation, monitoring with just one browser may not be enough for many organizations. We're going to share a lot of information about the user experience metrics that AlertSite has already introduced and will introduce in a couple of months into the accounts. I actually think this is going to challenge the current status quo for understanding web performance via user experience. We'll talk about API and web service monitoring, a very exciting capability that brings two of SmartBear's business units together to offer an exciting new capability to customers, and a brief update on status dashboard enhancements. So let's start with cross-browser performance monitoring. One of the things that we've seen over the last time period is a real shift towards ensuring that processes function well for users and not just that the website is up. And AlertSite has for quite a long time delivered the ability to measure performance and availability with Firefox. And at the end of last year, we introduced the ability to run those transactions on the monitoring network in Internet Explorer 8. And this summer, we'll be adding to that list the ability to run your transactions on the monitoring network in Chrome. I think there's a lot of browser fragmentation stuff going on in the marketplace, but an interesting statistic that's come out of StatCounter this month is that they're beginning to see that on the weekends, particularly on Sundays, that page view counts in terms of market share, that Chrome is actually exceeding Internet Explorer, and I would imagine for many of us this is raising the specter of its performance and our need to understand that our site is both functioning and performing in that browser as well. So using real browsers means that setup is fast and easy, and virtually no scripting is required. And because we're using real browsers, we're interacting with the application at the user layer, which means that we're using form fields, clicking the buttons, and using the menus, so that we're actually testing that the functional aspects of the web application are working at each and every measurement, and that one recording recorded in DejaClick will play back in any browser. And finally, we're supporting our test on demand, which is our ability to execute any transaction right now from any location and watch it play back screen by screen on your desktop. We're supporting that for the cross-browser capabilities as well. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Brian to do a quick demonstration of the cross-browser capabilities.
Okay, thank you, Ken. So what I'm going to do now is bring up a recording that I already have on my my system here. Open here and then get our script. So I have a Wikipedia test here that I'm going to play back on the desktop. Or I go to wikipedia.org, select English. and then go to the main English site. So playback complete, you get a confirmation message. So at this juncture now that I've played it back on the desktop, I can go to the test on demand feature here, which is this yellow arrow, orange arrow right here. Once I click on the test on demand option, now I have the ability to test with either Firefox or Internet Explorer. So I'll just run both tests and then show you the difference between the two sets of results. So I'll just pick Atlanta, and I'll run this test from Atlanta. So I'm going to click test. So what we're doing here right now is taking this test from my desktop and loading it onto the Atlanta, Georgia server. Once it's loaded onto that Atlanta server, the test is run from Atlanta to wherever this site or these sites are being hosted. So now we have a completed successful result test. So then I'm going to click on Test on Demand again, and now I'm going to select Internet Explorer. So I select Internet Explorer now. I'm going to select a location. I'll select Atlanta also, and I'm going to click Test. And so now again, we're uploading this now to our Atlanta monitoring location that's running Internet Explorer. And if you notice here in the top right corner now of this window here of our view from that server, we see the Internet Explorer logo. So again, we're going through the two tests, the two steps or actions actually. So this report is now completed successfully. So if I click on the first page for our IE test, it's going to bring up here our waterfall graph. This waterfall graph is going to show you the performance of all the objects and images, all of the Web 2.0 components of the page. So if you notice down here now, we have a favicon icon. I know for a fact that this one here is doesn't render on the Internet Explorer. So if I go to the other window now, on the Firefox, so if I go now to the waterfall graph for our Firefox, we're going to see that there is no, oh, here it is, but it's loaded differently on the page. So again, that's just a reflection of how the different browsers deliver the pages differently. So again, here's an example of a waterfall graph showing Firefox here for a page test, as well as a device test versus an Internet Explorer test. Even if we look at the metrics here, we can see 0.8834 seconds for Internet Explorer versus 0.4468 seconds for Firefox. Okay, so just wanted to show you the differences there, so I'll turn it back over to Ken.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so I'd like to talk to everybody a little bit about a subject that I've been questing on here at AlertSite for many years, and it's really about understanding true user experience. I think that all of us on this call probably more than most understand just how much speed matters and how it has an impact on business results. But the real question that I have to ask as we introduce these new metrics in AlertSite is, what really does speed mean, and which are the right performance metrics to focus on, probably the ones that impact the business key performance indicators. So there's really three perspectives of user experience that I think are relevant and that we're capable of collecting data on. The first is the network perspective, and I think you guys are pretty familiar with that network perspective. We'll show an example and talk more of that in a minute. Then there's the browser perspective. There's a set of signals that the browser emits as it's rendering the web page about how the web page is rendering and certain key milestones in the rendering of the web page. And then there's the user perspective, which is how would a user perceive the page is loading. And this is more, I think, of a perceived performance metric rather than a harder performance metric. And to really triangulate and manage user experience well, you really need all three. So many of you are probably familiar with the chart that's displayed on the right-hand side of this page. This is that traditional waterfall report that many of us have looked at, and of course this is a copy of the waterfall report from AlertSite, but you've also seen data like this from other tools, maybe Firebug or Web Inspector. And these tools are really, these metrics are the traditional view of how we've all looked at web performance. It's that full page load time that that really focuses on how long it takes to get all of the resources from the servers to the browser. And you get all those detailed network timings, the full page time, the base page time, DNS, TCP Connect, and first byte. And you know, for as long as I can remember, this full page time has really been sort of the holy grail in terms of web performance. But there are other aspects that need to be considered when you're really trying to pay attention to user experience. So one aspect of new metrics that we already released to the customer accounts in February. So if you're monitoring with DataClick, if you're monitoring in IE or Firefox today, you're getting some or all of these metrics. Internet Explorer doesn't give the DOM content load metric currently, but we've found a way to latch it, and we'll be adding it to the accounts shortly. But the browser emits signals as it's loading the web page. And if you look at that blue and red line in the full page chart here, that essentially is indicating the DOM load and page load times as the resources are loading on the page. And often, I think it's considered perhaps a rule of thumb that the DOM load metric is typically considered the point at which the page can be responsive to your users, and that's often a very important metric that web performance optimization efforts focus on. The page load metric is when the browser thinks the content is completed for that page. However, for those of us who are constructing web pages, we also know that there's lots of stuff that we often have happening on the page with JavaScript dynamically after the onload event. So these are a number of new metrics that help you understand user experience. Another thing that's interesting that I'm not sure if everyone knows is that every document that's a part of a web page actually emits its own DOM and page load signals, and AlertSite is capturing them for each document, so you can drill down to that level. And Brian will show you when he does the demonstration in a little bit how you can set an option in the Edit Site screen to determine which documents metrics get rolled up for higher level reporting. But really, to understand user experience, you need another perspective. And I think, you know, I'd like to start out talking about this by relaying a story that a customer shared with me very recently. It was a story about how, not that long ago, they had evaluated using a dynamic site acceleration for their site and not just caching. And they actually noted in their page load, that traditional network view metrics, that it appeared that there was about a 20% increase in the full page load times. But what they relayed to me was that they really didn't see any change in the business results. And as we were discussing this and sharing information about the upcoming user experience metrics that we're going to release in June, what they had relayed to me was a hypothesis that perhaps the reason that there was no impact in the business metrics was because there was no real impact in terms of perceived performance to the end users, even though technical performance was increased. So the perceived performance metrics that AlertSite is bringing to the table in June allow us to measure observationally from the user perspective the first paint timings and the above the fold timings, so how long it takes the page to stabilize in the visible viewport of the browser. The way that we've done this essentially is we've built, programmatically of course, a set of robot eyeballs which watch the page render and analyze, as the page is rendering, these key milestones in the process. So let's look at an example together that put all of these perspectives on one page. This is a load of the Amazon homepage, and the technical perspective, or the waterfall report, shows a full page load time of 3.61 seconds, and this is pretty typical for the Amazon homepage in our measurements. The browser perspective of the timings is that the web browser had completed loading the HTML in about 1.25 seconds, and that the page load event happened in under 2 seconds. But more interestingly, and to me what I consider a really game-changing perspective, is the user perspective saw that that first image at the top right was visible to users in 0.1 seconds, and then the web page went through a series of changes where the ads on the right-hand side rendered, but that the page was stabilized in the visible viewport by 0.6 seconds. So the question that I would ask the attendees today is, how does this, how will this change how we all look at web performance? Brian, do you think you could give us a demonstration of the browser perspective of user experience metrics?
Sure, I can. So we will go into our console, and we will run a test. Test on demand for our Amazon homepage. So it's already selected up here in the Test Your Site drop-down box. Test type will be Test on Demand. So at this juncture, I'm just going to select, let me scroll down here, I'll select Fort Lauderdale. I'll point and click Submit. So the script is loading on that Fort Lauderdale monitoring location. And shortly here, we will see the waterfall graph for Amazon.com homepage. As I click the icon here to show us the waterfall graph now, did I just close it? No, I didn't. No, so here it is. So I will right click here. Here we go. So here's that Amazon homepage waterfall graph. It opened in a different tab. So now we will see here the starting GET request, the initial base page, right here. And then if you notice here, you see your blue and your red lines represent your DOM and your page load times. So ultimately, the page loaded in 2.9609 seconds. But as we scroll down in the report here, we're going to see the points at which the browser shows both the DOM load time and then the page load times, where it was the end user would have been able to interact with the page. So and that time falls within the 1 and the 1 and 1.5 second mark. Okay.
Thank you, Brian. At this point, we'd like to poll today's participants about user experience, and of course, we thank you for your input on this. What we'd like to ask is, do you feel these new user experience metrics will change how your organization looks at performance? And we'll just pause for a minute or so, giving everybody a chance to respond.
Okay, Ken, the results are there.
Okay, thank you. So let's go ahead and move on. So I'd like to talk for a minute now about API and web service monitoring. Gartner says that we're really entering a golden age of APIs. Maybe that's because SOA or service-oriented architectures, are finally delivering on the promise of distributed computing and interaction that Corba never could live up to. Hope I'm not dating myself by saying that. By 2014, Gartner says that about 75% of all Fortune 1000 companies will offer public web APIs to their constituencies. And, it seems like mobile, cloud, social, and interconnectedness in general have really come together to create this golden age of APIs. And the interesting thing about APIs as they relate to user experience is that APIs are often one of many requests that are happening that ultimately fulfill an end-user experience. And so I think the gist of what I'm trying to say here is that APIs need to be extra performant because oftentimes they're just one of the players in the larger end-user experience. So I'd like to take a minute to talk about what we've released and when that will happen. And I thought maybe it would make sense to start with a discussion about what is SOAP UI. For those of you who don't know, SOAP UI is a product developed by another one of the SmartBear business units, the SmartBear business unit from Sweden. And it is the world's most popular tool for creating scripted interactions with web services and APIs that don't really have interfaces. SOAP UI has been downloaded more than 3 million times and has an active user community of almost 1 million users. If you have web services in your organization, you're probably using SOAP UI already. So what did we just release? What we released just recently was the ability for the latest SOAP UI client, version 4.5, to be able to not only run test cases for web services on the desktop, the way testers and developers have traditionally done it, but the ability to test on demand, just like you can from days a click, to be able to execute a web service or API test that you have running on your desktop and have that run from a monitoring station on AlertSite's network and give you back the results. What we're releasing in May is the ability to take that same test case and upload it to AlertSite for ongoing operational monitoring. So this is the first really significant integration that we've done with a sister company at SmartBear, and I think both of us are very excited about the capabilities that this brings to the API marketplace. And at this point, Brian is going to give us a little demonstration of the SOAP UI test on demand capability.
Okay, so here on my desktop you will see I have the SOAP UI console open. I've also loaded a test. It's an API test that we're actually requesting the AlertSite reporting API for availability. So in here we have the details of the test steps for this test. So if I click the play button, we're going to show the test running. And this is the functionality built into the to the client, the SOAP UI client, for manually testing one-offs using the desktop client here. So here we see on the bottom here, test case finished, with status with finished. Time taken is 0.8341 seconds. So now, what we've added here now is the test on demand capability within this client on the desktop. So what this brings to the functionality of the desktop client is the ability to test from multiple locations around the globe that we currently test from our monitoring locations with AlertSite. So at this point, we just use the Chicago Ubiquity as the default. But when I click the Run Test button here now, what we're actually doing now is loading the script now on that monitoring location. And we're running a test on demand, exactly how we run the test on demand for our Deja click scripts within the AlertSite console. So this is what Ken referenced here as far as being able to run the test on demand from the desktop, and later on in the next approximately 45 to 60 days, we will be able to actually monitor these SOAP requests within your console. So as you see here from this test status, we loaded this project, uploaded it to the monitoring location, and now I'm going to just show you the test results. So it's retrieving the report, and so here we have the results. This is our typical data that we present to you whenever we're running a test in the console. So again, you're going to have a similar level of functionality for your SOAP scripts right now as a test on demand, but ultimately as a monitoring functionality within your console later on this quarter.
Thank you, Brian. And just one thing I'd like to add, one of the key aspects of this that we'll be bringing to other capabilities over the course of time is that this will allow customers who are creating assets, in this case test scripts, in the test and development process to reuse those same assets for production level monitoring. Before we go on here, I'd like to ask one more final poll question for today, and that's related to web services. How many of the attendees on this call are you currently supporting web services in your production environment?
So it looks like the vast majority are in fact supporting web services in their production environment. Thank you everyone for responding.
Thank you, Andrea. Okay, so the last update for today's call before we take some questions is just about, some of you may have noticed that some of the stylings around the status dashboard have been updated. And in fact, last week we did release a new dashboard that has a new look and feel. It also should have performance enhancements for customers who have many, many devices. And memory consumption is improved, as well as widening the display grid for customers with long monitor names. And of course, this is our opinion, but we believe we've improved the general color scheme a bit and made it brighter for customers to review. We're not going to demonstrate the new dashboard because we think everyone sees it every single day when they log into the console. But of course, we're always interested in your input on how well it's working for you. At this point, that concludes the updates that we were going to share for today. But we would like to stop and take questions from today's participants. We know, especially those that are here are active users and customers, and we're very interested in, hearing what you think and responding to any questions that you have from today's presentation.
And so again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat interface on GoToWebinar, and we'll take a minute or two to sort through some questions and then get started with some answers. Okay, Ken and Brian, so one question that came in, do we have to be using SOAP UI to monitor our APIs with AlertSite?
So the answer to that question is not totally. AlertSite for a pretty long time has had the capability to interact with web services with the basic site monitored plans or with some manually scripted efforts for customers. But the SOAP UI capability brings a number of things to the table. One is a fantastic client interface that allows you to define these interactions in a really easy way, just like DejaClick does for web application monitors. And it also will allow for self-service setup of those complicated interactions which require token passing, like when you get the security token at login and things like that. So at the moment, we do web service monitoring today, but the SOAP UI capabilities will bring some, I think, very exciting new capabilities as well as self-service ability to customers.
Okay. Another question we had came in during Brian's demonstration of the cross-browser monitoring functionality. And the question is, would the difference in the AlertSite script response times be related to the browser rendering on the AlertSite side or the monitored server?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question one more time, please?
Sure. Would the difference in the AlertSite script response time be related to the browser rendering on the AlertSite side or the monitored server?
So that's kind of a complicated question. So rendering times happen on the client. So specifically, what we're doing is we're sort of bringing together how the orchestra of participants, which includes the server and the network, third-party data, and all the requests that are happening with that, how all of that is rendering together on the client. So we are taking those metrics from our monitoring server, but they're based on, in some part, how all of the resources are delivered to the browser and how well your page is optimized to provide the best download time and user experience. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, another question is, how do I attach parameters to my SOAP monitoring requests?
So that's a good question. In the SOAP client, there are fields where you set the parameters that you're passing in the request. And, they look, while I don't have that up to demonstrate right this minute, you click on the test case, and then there's several fields where you enter the values of the parameters that you're passing in, either in the query string of the REST request or in the SOAP envelope of a SOAP request.
Okay. The next question, will there be updates to the reporting options? I know that you have recently made some updates, but the ability to modify an existing report is still unavailable. I have a few reports that contain over 50 scripts, so when I need to add another script to the report, I have to recreate the report each time.
So there is some ongoing efforts towards both making the current reports more user-friendly, as well as some, I think, pretty exciting capabilities coming with dynamic reporting. So I guess what I'd like to say here is the first thing that I think you said was that when a new site is added, the report isn't picking that up. That I think would be a great idea to submit as a feature request. So I'll take note of that. But I also believe there's a new dynamic reporting interface coming around the time that user experience emerges, because one of the things that the current reports have is, just like I think most tools, they focus on response times, and as we move forward with these new user experience metrics, the new dynamic reporting interface will make it easy to trend many of the other metrics as well as just response time to help us really triangulate user experience.
Okay. Another question is, you talked about the new user experience metrics changing the way we look at performance. What tips do you have for using the new user experience metrics alongside the traditional metrics?
So, using this data is actually fairly new for us as well, and so I'll try to offer some opinions without having much, field experience yet with these new data points. But I think, the questions that I ask myself here are really about, if you were a user of your application, excuse me, is it more important to you that all of the assets of the page are loading in a certain amount of time, or from your perspective as the user, that perceived portion is optimized? I don't think that too many of we're all pretty kind of technically oriented around web performance, and I will tell you, I still notice that the left bottom corner side of the browser is chugging away, churning at transferring data and resources as a page is loading, because that's kind of where I come from. But I would bet that none of our actual constituent users pay attention to that, and for them, perception is probably much more important than the actual details of reality in terms of all the page resources. So I think my first recommendation is really to begin evaluating that data and determining for your application which of the metrics. Is it the DOM load metric? Is it the first paint metric? Is it the above the fold metric? Or is it still the traditional page load metric that's the one that becomes the real key performance indicator for your application? And then the new reporting will allow you to do more trending around those particular metrics, and we'll follow that up in Q3 with the ability to do alarming on all these new metrics as well, so that we can adjust how we operationally respond to shifts in those timings.
Thanks. And Ken, it looks like that's the end of the questions, so if you want to go ahead to our last slide. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and we hope that you found the session really useful. Everyone will receive a link to a recording of this presentation. There were a few questions around pricing for some of the new capabilities. We can follow up with you individually, and feel free to contact us at the phone numbers listed below or the email listed below on this slide. But again, we thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to future What's New webinars every quarter. Have a great afternoon.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for attending.
Thank you. Bye-bye.